I had the retirement papers in my coat pocket the morning I left, signed, dated, folded twice, the corners gone soft from 3 weeks of handling. Zoya didn't know. I'd been meaning to tell her. I kept thinking I'd find the right moment, the right words, something that didn't come out sounding like a speech. I never did. She pressed her hand flat against my chest at the door, just held it there. I could feel the warmth of it through my jacket. I put my hand over hers, and we stood like that in the hallway, not saying anything. She smelled like coffee, like the soap she'd used for as long as I'd known her. Then I picked up my bag and left. 14 times before. I was good at this. You pack light, say something ordinary. Don't let it become something it doesn't need to be. Zoya understood. She never cried at the door, never asked me to be careful. She was better at departures than I was, honestly. She'd had more practice at the part that comes after. This one was the last. She just didn't know it yet. The dock was gray that morning. Everything was gray. The water, the sky, the long, low buildings at the far end of the yard. October does that. Drains the color out. The air had that particular bite to it, the kind that finds the gap between your collar and your neck no matter how you hold yourself. Cold enough that your breath showed. She sat heavy at the waterline, most of her hidden below the surface, just the sail and the curve of the hull showing. I'd commanded her for 3 years. I knew her the way you know a place you've lived in. I knew the sound of her ballast tanks cycling. I knew the rattle one of the aft compartment doors made when the pressure shifted. I knew the feel of the deck plating underfoot when she was surfaced versus deep, a different vibration entirely, one you registered in your knees before you registered it anywhere else. Up close, she smelled of diesel and salt and the particular closed-air smell of something that spends most of its life underwater. Not a pleasant smell. After 20 years, it was just the smell of work. I stood at the top of the ladder and looked back at the dock. Nobody there. I went down. The hatch closes and the light changes. Nobody who hasn't done it really gets this. Above the waterline, the light changes. It moves with the clouds. It comes from different angles across the day, and your body tracks all of that without you knowing, some internal clock running off it. Below, everything is dimly lit. Fixed. Same brightness in every compartment, same flat color, no variation at noon or midnight or 3 in the morning. After the first day, you stop noticing. After the first week, you can't quite remember the other kind. The inside of the boat was warm. That hits you first when you come in from October air, the heat of 96 men and running machinery in a sealed metal tube. It smelled of something with onions from the galley, laid over the usual machinery smell. Men moved through the corridor, voices low. Not because anyone told them to keep it down. The space just demands it. You feel it the second you're inside. Something about the closeness. I went forward, checked what needed checking. Nothing that needed my attention, just the normal back and forth of getting underway. After 14 deployments, I could do most of it without thinking. That evening, still surfaced, still with a signal, I sat at my desk and wrote to Zoya. I'd started doing this years ago. There was no practical reason for it. We couldn't send mail from depth, I knew that. But I wrote the letters anyway, and hand-delivered them when I got back, a stack of them, dated, in order. She liked it. She said it was like getting a message from the past. I told her it felt more like writing to the future. We were probably both right. My desk was a narrow fold-down shelf bolted to the bulkhead. Just enough room for paper, a pen, and a cup of tea I was never going to finish. Through the wall behind me, I could hear the engine. Underneath that, the water. When you're surfaced, the water moves against the hull with a rhythm to it. Irregular, but rhythm all the same. It's one of the things you stop noticing when you go deep. Down there, the water stops moving and just presses. That first letter was ordinary. I told her the dock was gray. Told her the coffee at the yard was bad as always. I told her I was thinking about the dacha again, A small place outside the city, somewhere with actual ground, a garden, something growing, and that when I got back we should stop talking about it and actually do it. 4 years of talking, time to do. I told her I loved her. I didn't tell her about the retirement papers. I'd put it in the next letter. That's what I told myself. I folded the letter and put it in my coat pocket, next to the retirement papers. 2 things I hadn't said out loud. Both of them folded the same way. That night we went down. She carried 16 nuclear ballistic missiles. I had stopped thinking about that after the first year. They were just part of what the submarine was. The pressure shift is something your body learns to absorb. Not painful, just a change. Ears, sinuses, the quality of the air on the way in. The sounds change with it. I stood in the passageway and watched the depth gauge needle move. That's the dive, really. A needle and the hull settling under the weight of the water, a low creak that runs through the whole boat once and then stops. Listening. She had a hum when she ran deep. Low, chest level, something you felt more than heard. After 3 years, I knew that hum well enough to read it. A wrong bearing, a trim that needed adjusting, a pump working harder than it should. I didn't need gauges for any of it. The hum told me. That night it told me nothing was wrong. I went to my bunk, thin mattress, flat pillow, lights already low. I lay there and thought about Zoya's hand through my jacket, the missing button, the smell of the apartment, thought about the dacha, a garden, somewhere that belonged to us. I slept without dreaming. 14 deployments, 14 times home. This was going to be 15. I knew what I was doing. I'd been doing it my whole life. There was nothing to worry about. I believed that completely. Burov hummed 3 bars of something and then stopped. Every time. Same fragment, same place where it cut off, like the song ended there and he'd never learned what came after. I never asked him about it. He was young, 23, maybe 24. One of those faces that would look the same at 40. Good at his job. Quiet. He kept his station clean and his log entries short. The kind of man you don't worry about because he never gives you reason to. I noticed after a week that I was listening for it. The humming. That I'd registered somewhere without deciding to. That I would know when it stopped. 3 weeks of nothing. That's what most of a deployment is. People who haven't served think it's all readiness and tension. It's not. It's card games and bad coffee, and men who have already said everything they have to say to each other. Same corridors every day, same smells, machine oil, cooked food, recycled air that tastes faintly of metal no matter how long you breathe it. The same dim light every hour of every day until your body just stops asking what time it is. I didn't mind. I never had. Routine has weight to it. When everything around you is fixed, you stop spending energy on it. You can just work. My executive officer played cards every evening after his watch. Lost badly, consistently, badly, and with complete dignity. Never complained, never changed his expression, just gathered his cards at the start of each hand with the look of a man who was absolutely going to win this time. He never did. The men liked him for it. The engineering chief talked about his dog. Not the way people mention a pet, the way some men talk about their children. The dog's name was Bars. Bars had opinions about the weather. Bars had learned to open the kitchen cabinet. Bars had a complicated situation with the downstairs neighbor that had been ongoing for several months. By the end of the second week, I knew more about Bars than I knew about some men I'd served with for years. There was a cook who made a soup. Every few days he made this soup, and it filled the entire forward section with a smell. Onion and something deep underneath. Something that smelled like exactly the meal you wanted after 2 weeks of canned everything. Then you tasted it. Warm water, things floating. Nobody said anything. He was proud of that soup. There was nothing else. I knew all 96 of them. Names, not ranks. 20 years taught me that much. A crew where the captain knows names is a different crew. You feel it, even if you can't say where. On the 12th day, the engineering chief set a photograph on my desk without a word. Large brown dog in a yard, staring directly at the camera with great seriousness. I said it looked like a good dog. He said it was the best dog. I told him I believed him. I did. I kept writing letters, one about the Dacha. I'd been working it out in my head, where the garden would go, whether the soil out that way was any good, whether Zoya would want things she could eat or things she could look at. I knew nothing about gardening, neither did she. 2 pages on the question of tomatoes alone. It felt good to write about something that was going to happen. One about a meal she'd made years ago, a fish dish, her mother's recipe, the kind that takes most of a day. She'd made it once, early in our marriage, and I'd eaten it and told her it was good and gone back to the paper. On the 11th day, lying in my bunk after a watch, staring at the underside of the bunk above me, that meal came back to me out of nowhere. The smell of it, the weight of the plate. I got up at 1 in the morning and wrote her about it. Told her how good it actually was, that I should have put the paper down. Small things. Always small things. The ones you don't think to say when you're in the same room. The pocket had started to pull at the lining. It was the 3rd week when I noticed the water. The boat felt heavier. That's all I can tell you. Nothing on any instrument was different. Depth normal, temperature normal, engine running exactly as it should. But the hull sat differently in this stretch. A resistance. Like the water here had more to it, more density. Not slower, just harder to be in. I'd crossed this region before. Different route, different depth, but this same general area somewhere north and west of Iceland, where the floor drops away and the water goes very cold and very still. I couldn't remember it feeling like this. I logged nothing. Burov hummed his 3 bars and stopped. The cards went around the table. The cook's soup smell moved through the corridor. The engineering chief said something about bars and the neighbor's cat. I slept. I wasn't worried. I told myself it was just water. Burov came to find me. He didn't do that. In 3 weeks, he hadn't left his station once during a watch. Not for food, not for anything. He was the kind of man who treats his post like something bad happens the moment he steps away. Careful, steady. He found me in the corridor outside my quarters with one side of his headphones pulled back off his ear, still wearing them like he'd stood up and walked out mid-listen, one side still pressed to his ear. His face was the same as always, young, calm. He said he needed me to look at something. He said it quietly. I followed him. His compartment was the size of a closet, 1 chair, 1 console, a shelf with a logbook and a cup of coffee he'd stopped drinking hours ago. The equipment gave off a low, dry heat. The sonar display threw green light across everything. His face, the walls, the backs of his hands resting on the console edge. He sat me down and pointed at the screen. I looked. Far out at the edge of the equipment's range there was a return. Faint. Easy to read as noise, pressure interference, a thermal layer bouncing the signal back wrong. I almost said it out loud. I almost closed the log and went back to bed. Then I saw what it was doing. It wasn't drifting. It wasn't on any heading. It was holding position relative to us, same distance, same angle off the bow, as we moved through the water. Burov had been watching it for 6 hours. He'd checked his equipment twice. Both checks were in the log, written out in his short, clear handwriting. He couldn't classify it. I sat with that. A vessel can shadow you. Both sides had done it for years. Run parallel, listen, stay out of sight. But not at that range. At that distance, the lag time alone makes it impossible. And anything fixed to the floor, a ridge, a shelf, stays fixed to the floor. Not to us. This was fixed to us. I leaned closer. The return sat there. Faint. doing what it had been doing for 6 hours without any variation at all. I straightened up, told Burov it was interference. The thermocline playing with the acoustics. It happened at this depth in this kind of water. I told him to mark it in the log and move on. Told him he'd done the right thing flagging it. He looked at me. Not long. 1 second, maybe 2. Then he nodded and wrote, "Interference, logged," and turned back to his screen. He knew what he'd seen. I knew what he'd seen. I went back to my quarters and sat on the edge of my bunk in the dark for a while. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay there listening. At that hour, the crew noise drops off, and what's left is the boat itself, the engine, the circulation system, the small sounds of metal holding pressure that you spend years learning to ignore. I lay there and heard all of it and stared at the bottom of the bunk above me. Not thinking about the contact. Call was made, interference, logged, done. At some point, 2 in the morning, maybe later, I got up and wrote to Zoya. Not about the contact. I wrote about the kitchen, the window above the sink, east-facing. In winter, the morning light came through it at a low angle and hit the wall above the stove, and the whole room went a particular color for about an hour before the sun moved. I had looked at that light for 20 years. I had never once mentioned it. I wrote about it now, what it looked like at 7 in the morning when the apartment was still quiet, what it looked like in February when the sun was barely up and the light came through thin and pale but still came through. Small and warm and enough. 1.5 pages. The most I'd written in a single letter. I folded it. I didn't go back to sleep. I sat at the desk in the quiet. Didn't look at the sonar log. Didn't think about the screen, the return sitting at the edge of resolution for 6 hours without drift, without deviation, holding its position without a single yard of drift. I told myself there was no reason to think about it. Until it was time for my watch. Burov stopped humming on the 24th day. I noticed before I knew I was listening. Mid-morning, passing his compartment on my way forward. Silence where there'd always been sound. I stopped in the corridor. The boat noise was the same as always. Engine hum, circulation system, the low creak of the hull. But the 3 bars were gone. I stood there for a moment. Then I walked on. He was still at his station when I looked in, still in his headphones. Log open, pen in hand. Nothing different about him that I could see. I didn't say anything to him. The next 9 days were like this. Small things going wrong. On the 25th day, an engineer ran the same load calculation 3 times and got 3 different answers. He came to me himself, stood in the doorway of my quarters with the logbook open and showed me the 3 numbers written one under the other. The look on his face wasn't embarrassment. It was nothing. Just empty. He said he didn't know which one was right, said he'd checked his work each time. I told him to take a break and come back to it. He nodded and left. I didn't follow up the way I should have. On the 26th day, a valve inspection that should have taken 20 minutes took 2 hours. The man running it kept losing his place in the checklist, starting over from the top. I heard about it secondhand, mentioned at the end of a watch the way you'd mention a change in the weather. No alarm in the voice. Just a fact. Meals got quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of men who know each other well. The other kind. The kind where you hear every scrape of a spoon, where someone sets a cup down too hard and 4 men look up at once. The engineering chief stopped talking about bars. The card games continued, but the banter was gone, and without it, they were just men sitting in a small room staring at cards. On the 26th day, 2 men who had served together for 6 years got into a fistfight in the aft compartment. Both of them steady. Both of them with records I'd put in front of anyone. By the time I got there, they were sitting on opposite sides of the corridor, not looking at each other. The man who'd reported it couldn't explain what set it off. When I asked each of them separately, they said the same thing. They didn't know. Not covering for each other. They genuinely didn't know. I put them both on report, sent them to their bunks, stood in the empty corridor for a while after, looking at nothing. On the 28th day, 2 men came to me separately, hours apart, and told me they'd had the same dream. They wouldn't say what it was. I asked both of them. One looked at the wall when he answered. The other looked at his hands. Both of them said they didn't want to put it in words. I didn't push. I'm not sure I wanted to know. Every 2 hours I went to check the sonar log. I'd wait until it wasn't Burov's watch. I'd sit in his empty compartment, cold coffee on the shelf, logbook squared to the corner, and look at the screen, the green light, the position. Still there, every time, same distance. 9 days, and it hadn't shifted by anything I could measure. And picked up the headset and put it on. I don't know why. After 9 days of looking, I wanted to hear it. Deep water has a sound. Clicks, pressure, the noise of cold water moving. You hear it in every direction. After 20 years, I knew what it was supposed to sound like. I turned the bearing toward the contact's position. Every other direction, normal, full, the usual noise. From the contact's bearing, nothing, not static. Silence. A gap in the water where there should have been sound, and there wasn't. Like something at that bearing was eating the noise before it got to me. I almost took the headphones off. Then I heard it, inside the silence. Faint. 3 notes. A pause. 3 notes. A pause. Burov's humming. The same 3 bars, same rhythm, same place where it cut off. Coming from outside the hull, from the direction of the contact. I took the headphones off and put them back on the shelf. Burov stopped humming on the 24th day. I'd told myself it was the pressure getting to him. The quiet, the 9 days. He stopped because he heard it first. Something out there had them now. I didn't log it. I went back to my bunk. The letters changed. Late, after my watch, pen on paper in the quiet. I started writing things I'd never said out loud. Not to Zoya, not to anyone. I wrote about a decision I'd made in '71, a crew I'd put in a difficult position and told myself was necessary, whether it had been, whether I'd known at the time that it wasn't. I wrote about what the 20 years had cost Zoya, the years she'd spent in that apartment waiting for a man who was mostly somewhere else. Things I'd never said out loud because saying them out loud would have meant deciding what to do about them. Put them in my coat pocket, but I knew they were different. These were the ones I'd burned before I got home. They weren't for her, they weren't for anyone. I just needed to write it somewhere. On the 31st day, the contact was gone. 2 in the morning. I went to the sonar station the way I'd been going every 2 hours for 9 days. Sat down in the green-lit compartment, looked at the screen, empty at the position. I checked twice, expanded the range, looked at everything the equipment could reach in every direction. Nothing. I went back through 8 hours of log entries. The contact had been there at my last check before I'd tried to sleep. Some point in the hours after, it had stopped showing up. No drift, no fade, no movement toward or away from us. Just there, and then not there. I sat in front of that screen for a long time. What I felt, I still can't name it right. It wasn't relief. I'd expected relief, and this wasn't it. Closer to loss, but that's not right either. I went back to my bunk. Burov was still silent at his station. The 2 men who'd dreamed the same dream hadn't mentioned it again. The fistfight hadn't been repeated. The crew was still quieter than it should be, still unsteady. But running. I lay there and told myself, it's over. We finish the patrol. I hand in the retirement papers. Zoya and I find the dasha. We plant something. We sit somewhere with a window and watch the light come in. On the 30th night, I had the dream. I was in our kitchen, the apartment. Everything was right: the floor, the stove, the window above the sink. I was standing in the doorway the way I sometimes stood before Zoya noticed I was there. She was at the window, the east-facing window. Light was coming through. The morning light, the low angle I'd written about. But it was wrong. Too bright, too white. Not the color morning makes in February. Something flat that filled the window and didn't cast shadows. Zoya was facing it. She wasn't moving. Her hands at her sides. Coffee on the counter behind her, still steaming. Everything in the kitchen was normal except the light and except that she was standing still and looking at it. The city outside was silent. Not quiet, silent. No traffic, no pipes, no noise from the building. Nothing. I tried to say her name. I couldn't. The light got brighter. The wall above the stove went white. Everything went white. Zoya was still at the window. I woke up at 2:47 a.m. Hull humming, boat running. I lay there for a long time. I knew what the two men had dreamed. I knew why they wouldn't say it. They saw their own kitchens, their own windows. Someone standing in the light who wasn't moving. The thing at the edge of sonar range had been watching more than the boat. It saw what we carried, the rooms, the people, and it showed us what was coming for them. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't write a letter that night. 2 days later, the communications started failing, not all at once. Words dropping out mid-sentence, long gaps of static, bursts that almost turned into something and then didn't. I had the equipment checked. Nothing wrong on our end. Then on the 33rd day, a transmission came through during the scheduled window. The communications officer brought me a single sheet of paper, most of it blank, 3 short lines of recovered text and a column of timestamps showing where the signal had dropped out. I didn't dream. I read the fragments 17 times. The first time I told myself it was equipment degradation. The second time I told myself atmospheric interference. We were at a depth where that happened, where the signal came apart on the way down and arrived as something less than what was sent. By the 5th time, I'd stopped telling myself anything and was just reading. Communications had been going wrong for 2 days before the transmission came through. Not cut, not jammed, just degraded, the incoming signal losing quality somewhere between the surface and us, words dropping out mid-sentence, long stretches of static between bursts that almost resolved and then didn't. I had it checked. Nothing wrong with our equipment. Whatever was failing was on the other end, or in the water between. He stood in the doorway while I read it. I told him I'd call when I needed him. He left. I sat alone with the sheet under the small light of my desk lamp and the engine sound behind the bulkhead. 3 fragments, maybe 40 words total, counting the partial ones at the edges. A strike, a location I recognized. A status code I'd been trained to know and had spent 20 years hoping I would never see written on anything real. The rest of the page was blank. I read those 40 words 17 times over the next 3 hours. The paper went soft at the corners from handling. I read them looking for another way to read them. There wasn't one. The fragments were telling me to launch ballistic missiles. Nuclear. That's what the status code meant. That's the only thing it had ever meant. I had been trained on that code for 20 years, so there would be no confusion when I saw it. There was no confusion. The only other possibility was that 40 words had come apart in the water and landed in the worst possible order by accident. One of those things was true. I didn't know which one. Protocol said to wait. Full confirmation before any action. I knew the protocol. I had followed it for 20 years, and I believed in what it was there to prevent. A man alone at depth with a bad signal and no way to verify shouldn't act on fragments. I sat with the sheet on my desk and thought about the shape. I thought about Burov, silent for 7 days. I thought about 2 men who'd had the same dream. I thought about Zoya. her hand flat against my chest in the gray hallway light, the soap smell, the robe worn thin at the elbows, the button she'd never replaced. I thought about the kitchen, the east-facing window, the morning light in winter coming through low and settling on the wall above the stove, the particular color of it, the hour when the apartment was still quiet and the coffee was hot and there was nothing else required. The mornings I would not see if I waited and did nothing, and the fragments were real. Protocol said to wait. I tried to reach the surface. 3 times in the next hour I had the communications officer send on every frequency we had, each time the same, static, dead air, the signal going out and nothing coming back. Not even the broken pieces we'd been getting for 2 days. Nothing. The communications officer looked at me after the 3rd attempt. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I gave the order at 7:14 a.m. 1 sentence. To the officer on watch. He was young, younger than most of them, and he looked at me the way Burov had looked at me when I told him to log the contact as interference. 1 second, maybe 2. Then he turned and did what I said. That was all. That was how it happened. I was the calm man. 20 years of being the calm man. This was the call the calm man made when everything came together. I heard the voices move from compartment to compartment as the order was confirmed. Then I felt it. The first one hit like something punched the hull from the inside. A deep thud that came up through the deck, plating into my legs and kept going. Chest, jaw, teeth. The boat lurched. She went light on one side as the weight left her. Tons of missile and fuel and warhead blown upward out of the launch tube on a column of compressed gas, and the boat felt every pound of it leave. The trim shifted hard. The hull groaned, not the sound she made settling at depth, something I had never heard her make in 3 years. The water rushed in to fill the empty tube. She steadied. For 2 seconds, everything was silent. The second one fired. Same thud, same lurch. I put my hand against the bulkhead and felt it come through the metal. Around me, men held on to whatever was bolted down. Nobody spoke. The lights flickered with each launch and came back. I counted them. Everyone. Standing in that corridor, I counted each one, leaving the boat the way you count something that is never coming back. When the last tube fired, the boat went quiet in a way I had never heard. Not running deep quiet, not watch change quiet, the quiet of a thing that has done what it was built for and has nothing left. I stood there. The nuclear missiles were above us now, above the surface, moving faster than anything I would ever see, carrying what they carried toward coordinates I had studied on maps for 20 years, grid references, yield calculations. That's all they had ever been. They were cities. They had kitchens in them. They had windows that faced east. I could not call them back. That is the part they never teach you. They teach you the codes, the protocol, the sequence of it. They do not teach you the 10 seconds after, when you are standing in a metal corridor 300 meters under the ocean, and the thing you just did is already gone, and there is no order in any language that brings it back. I went back to my quarters. I sat on the edge of my bunk. The crew ran their watches, their checks, the routines that hold a boat together, but the talk was gone. I went back to the records, old patrol logs, route summaries, contact reports from previous deployments in this sector. The paper was old in places, the handwriting of men I'd never met. The shape had been there before, not on every patrol, not in every log, but I found it in 2 entries, different crews, different commanders, both crossing this same stretch of water. Contact at extreme range, geometry inconsistent, holding position relative to the vessel, duration approximately 9 days, classified as interference, multiple incidents, no clear cause identified. The other log said nothing about it, just the classification and then the next day's entry, ordinary as anything. I sat in the quiet and waited to find out if I was right. Outro. The surface. A woman in Minsk is making dinner when the radio changes, not goes off, changes. There was music, something familiar, something she'd heard before, and then mid-note it became a voice, official tone, the kind radio voices use when the thing being read wasn't chosen. She turns from the stove. The pot is still on, steam still rising. Her husband looks up from the table. They look at each other. She turns the radio up. A boy in Iowa stands in his yard, his head tilted back. He is 9 years old, drawn outside by a clear afternoon and a quiet habit of watching the planes. He knows the gentle anatomy of contrails, how they form, how they slowly spread across the blue, and how they take a full hour to fade into harmless, thin white smears. He has spent enough of his short life looking up to know exactly what normal looks like. What is happening above him isn't normal. A violent white line is tearing across the sky, moving far too fast and refusing to fade. He watches in silence as it drags from one horizon to the other. Then a second line appears. Then, far to the north, a third shape begins to arc. He knows it isn't a contrail. The boy lowers his head and goes back inside the house. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't have the words for what he just saw, but some deep, quiet instinct tells him that even if he did, speaking wouldn't help. A farmer outside Stockholm, Sweden, steps off his porch before dawn and stops. Cold. Always cold at this hour in October. But underneath the cold, there's something else, something chemical, faint, that doesn't belong to the season or the fields. He stands in the yard and breathes it in, looks at the sky. The sky looks like the sky. Dark at the top, lighter at the horizon, stars still out. The birch trees at the edge of the property stand pale and still. He stands there for a while. Then he goes back inside. His wife is still asleep. He stands in the doorway of their bedroom and watches her breathe. He doesn't wake her. He doesn't know how to explain what he felt out there, and he's not sure that explaining it would help either of them. He goes to the kitchen, sits down, folds his hands on the table the way his father used to do in church. He waits for the light to come. It doesn't feel like morning anymore. The sirens don't all start at once. They start across 40 minutes. Different cities, different countries, different time zones. Each country has its own pitch, its own rhythm, its own way of cutting through whatever was there before. The sound, a low frequency you feel in your sternum before your ears find it. People say you don't forget it. Emergency broadcasts in 6 languages, all saying variations of the same thing. Men in rooms in Moscow, Washington, London, Beijing, the same quality of silence between transmissions. Each one the calm man, each one believing, completely. At 6:20 a.m., the window closed. I put the pen down. I sat on the bunk and closed my eyes. I felt the weight of the water above us. It felt like a blanket. I don't know what comes next. It doesn't even matter anymore after the dice has already been cast. I wasn't afraid. I was just tired and emotionless. And I waited for the dark. Hey, Rex here. If you made it this far, thank you, genuinely. These stories take a while to put together, and it means a lot that you listened to the whole thing. If you want to support the channel, I have a Ko-fi link in the description. No pressure at all, just there if you ever feel like it. The channel got demonetized a little while back, so it does actually help more than you'd think. And if you liked this one, subscribe. Good night and take care.